Doing really well. Thanks for asking. How's everyone else?
It's nice. It's a good day.
Good.
It's Tuesday.
It is. It's beautiful out here.
Well, it's 9 o'clock. Okay, we have a couple of more people coming in. Good morning, Jeremy.
Good morning. How are you all?
Morning. Good. So I guess we can go ahead and get started. I'm Kojo, the president here at Monroe County Community College, and some of you I've met on Zoom in the past. Others I haven't, but I think we have our entire cabinet here, and then we have our institutional research director, Curie, Dr. Curie Wygonek, also with us today. And oh, there's Stephanie coming in now from the Detroit Chamber. Stephanie. Hi, Stephanie.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Morning, Stephanie.
And so with that, oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead. Go ahead, sir. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'll hand over to either Timothy or Scott. Yeah, so.
Yeah, Scott, do you have anything you want to say to kick things off?
Nothing at all. Thank you for all your work. Tyler, thank you for the back and forth, which was pretty extensive, but very positive, and I look forward to it today.
Yeah, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking some time out of your schedule to talk about our findings from the multi-month study of your data and interviews we conducted and so forth. My name's Tim Rennick. I'm the executive director of the National Institute for Student Success. I'm joined this morning by several of my NIST colleagues, Tyler, who is project lead, Ryan, Carrie, and Jeremy. I think that's our team. So thank them for being here and for their work. But we're excited to spend some time with all of you talking a little bit about what our findings were and sharing some of the recommendations. And I know this is part of a longer term project that you're involved with a cohort of schools in the Detroit area. So we're happy to talk about what some next steps might be as well. So if you give me just a second, I'm going to share my screen and walk you through both our diagnostic findings and some of our recommendations. Can you now see that title slide? You can. Okay, great. So let me start a little bit about first thanking your team for their incredible work. We've now worked with well over a dozen campuses over the last 6 months or so, and the Monroe team was fantastic. They moved through this process not only quickly, but by providing really great and constructive input. So thanks to the project lead, Scott, Grace, and Carrie, you did a fantastic job. And a lot of the insights that we're about to share are because of your hard work and the work of the entire Monroe team. Let me start by saying a little bit about what this process is and what it's not. The NIST is founded on several principles that were gathered as a result of a lot of evidence-based research. One, that institutions can be their own worst enemies, that we create lots of bureaucratic structures and processes that end up tripping up students and leading to students dropping out. More than that, when you analyze these administrative processes and their effect on students, they disproportionately impact students from underserved backgrounds. So not only are these bureaucracies part of the reason students are dropping out, they're also a cause of equity gaps. And we'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. Secondly, and more positively, that we now have diagnostic abilities to really pinpoint where these problems are, that we can use data analysis to really understand what are the specific practices and procedures on your particular campus that are tripping up your students. And third, and even more encouragingly, there are now a number of evidence-based, scalable approaches to providing better student supports for students. that can not only improve graduation rates significantly, but have been shown at not just Georgia State, but other institutions to significantly reduce and even eliminate equity gaps. So we'd be walking through those steps. First, looking at the diagnostic insights that we developed as a result of looking at several sources. So we looked at over 20 years of your IPEDS data, your federal submissions. We conducted a campus survey of a number of stakeholders identified by your project leads as significant for moving the needle at Monroe with regard to graduation rates and reducing equity gaps. We had a questionnaire that your project leads helped complete so we could understand better the systems you're using, your staffing model, and the technology you have available and so forth. We also then collected additional data that was provided by your project leads. All of that led to the first part of this summary, which are our diagnostic analysis of the challenges that you're facing. Just to note, these challenges that we're about to look at are not meant to be comprehensive. What we're trying to do is really identify the areas of biggest need where we believe the problems are creating the biggest impact on your graduation rates and on some equity issues that you're facing. And what we want to do is not only provide what we think the problems are, but supply you with evidence to talk to other campus stakeholders if they need convincing to show them why these areas are really areas of concern. And so with that said, we'll turn first to our diagnostic analysis of the challenges that you're facing. There's a lot of text here, and obviously we're going to provide your whole team with the final written version, and you can hopefully read through it with some care. But you are a very important institution to the region. You're critical in not only awarding credentials to students, but also as a pathway to four-year institutions. Your enrollments, while they've declined over the last decade or so, have been stabilizing, which is positive and uncommon, especially for a two-year institution during the pandemic. But there are some issues of lack of a coordinated and systematic support for your students that need to be tended to. Many of these issues are already noted in your strategic plan, the 2020 to 2025 strategic plan. Others are being focused on your work plan for the collaborative, but it's clearly attention needs to be paid. The key strengths, you've got a leadership that is highly committed to improving student success. You've recently hired a director of student success. That's really positive. You've made investments in your IR and data team. And so I think you're well ahead of the game of some of the other institutions we've been working with across this collaborative with regard to data capabilities and data knowledge. But there are four key challenges we're identifying. The first is a lack of a formal first-year experience. This is kind of broadly construed. It includes an orientation that is not very substantive and robust. It includes the fact that there's not a required first-year course or first-year experience for students. There's not formal onboarding into academic fields. They're not learning communities and so forth. These sorts of issues are getting students off to a less than stable start in their first year academically. Secondly, insufficient academic support for key courses. So you have some courses that are critical to student progression that have quite high DFW rates. But right now, there's not really a targeted strategy for dealing with those DFW rates or dealing with course analytics more broadly, all the way extending to things like course scheduling, where to target tutoring and supplemental instruction and so forth. So this is another area that we see Monroe being challenged with currently. Third, under-coordinated advising. Students face significant hurdles right now into getting the kind of academic advice they need. There is not proactive, systematic support for students. In many cases, students are meeting with an advisor early on, and then it's unclear and certainly non-mandatory what happens as far as advising after that point. And then fourth, under-coordinated student-facing communication. So what kind of strategy do you have for making sure students have the information they need in a timely and coordinated and focused fashion? Right now, there are not the kind of tools that an institution of your sort could leverage to benefit students and to provide better information for them to guide them along and get them to the point of completing their credentials. So for each of these 4 key challenges, I'm about to turn to some data, as I say, to kind of give you the grounding you'll need to talk to campus stakeholders about these matters and to fully explain them. But before I get to the backup evidence, I want to pause and see if there are any questions about this overarching analysis of where some of your challenges are. Does this seem about on target? Is this consistent with what you're already aware are some of the issues you're facing at Monroe?
Yes, most definitely.
Okay, well, good. Then let me just show why we came to these conclusions, and I'll try to be fairly brief here. But the first year issue with regard to retention and graduation rates. Here we're tracking on the left your 1-year retention rate for the last 7 or 8 years. On the right, it's your 3-year graduation rate. We use these metrics because these are the officially reported metrics to the federal government. So these are the standard outcomes that the federal government is tracking. And what you can see is that your retention rate's kind of been up and down in recent years, but it's on par with, it's slightly below the national 2-year average. So your line is the kind of maroon line, and the national 2-year average is the aqua line, and the Michigan 2-year average is the gold line. And you're right on path, a little below it. What you can see, though, happens over time is by the time you get to the 3rd year and are looking at the students who actually completed a degree, you've fallen further behind the national standard for 2-year institutions. There's a 9-point drop. That brings our attention to the fact that there are some things we need to tend to about what's happened to students, even if they make it through the 1st year, as far as getting them to the point of completion. It's also an opportunity. So not all these cases where there's a gap between your performance and other institutions is that necessarily a bad thing, because it shows that there's an opportunity to do things that will increase your enrollments and increase your success rates. Speaking of enrollments, here's the picture of your enrollments over the last 7 or 8 years. There was a fairly steep decline in your enrollments between 2013 and 2018. You can see there it's a 23% drop in those years. Interestingly and very positively, you've stemmed the tide at a time when it's almost impossible to do so. So nationally, as you know, 2-year enrollments are down considerably by as much as 20% in many states. But you've through the pandemic basically held on to most of your students and kind of stemmed the tide. What we do see happening over the same period of about 7 or 8 years is you're trading more full-time students for part-time students with your participation in the Michigan Reconnect program, which we strongly support. We think it's a great program and a good opportunity for you to build enrollment. It's likely that number is going to increasingly shift away from full-time to part-time students, since many of those Michigan Reconnect students will be part-time. And that's going to be a challenge, because if you look how you're currently performing for your full-time versus part-time students, there's a huge gap there when it comes to retaining the students. So 26-point higher 1-year retention rate for your full-time than your part-time students. So it's another reason why we'll really want to put some attention on better student supports, because you're enrolling more part-time students, and you'll continue to do so with some of your recent commitments. And then 3-year graduation rates for full versus part-time students. The gap closes, but it's still one that's significant enough that it deserves your attention. So some positives. For the next couple of slides, we're going to be looking at these stack charts. These are the results of the surveys we conducted for your campus stakeholders, so leaders who are identified as important to moving the needle in your student success efforts. We ultimately got replies from almost everybody who we sent the survey to. 34 individuals submitted replies. And on these stack charts that we'll be going through, you want to see blue, because blue means that your leadership who completed the surveys think that Monroe is well aligned with best practices in whatever category we're talking about. You don't want to see gray, because gray means your leaders think you're not currently aligned in that area. And you don't really want to see pink, On these slides, the pink is very narrow, but those were individuals who said they just didn't know. They couldn't answer one way or another. And the reason why that's not a good thing is these are 34 people who are identified as critical to moving the needle in student success at Monroe. So you really want to, have people informed about what Monroe is doing one way or another. So here are some real positives. One is the promotion and prioritizing of student success among the senior leadership. Complete buy-in there. The alignment levels are very high. Most of the stakeholders say, yes, the senior leadership is aligned, is promoting and prioritizing student success. Another really positive area, as I alluded to a few minutes ago, was your data capabilities. That when asked about whether teams at your institution are able to request and receive timely data reports and so forth relative to student success efforts, a really high level of alignment, and I will say a higher level of alignment than any of the other two-year institutions we're working with in the cohort. So that's fantastic as well. Where we begin to see some problems are areas like the first-year experience. So on the left, we asked about whether there's some kind of summer program that you begin to take students, especially those who might be less likely to succeed once they arrive at Monroe, and give them a productive and intentional start. And there, the alignment level is very low, only 12%. The second question on this asked about learning communities, freshman learning communities, and first-year experience in courses. Are students in a systematic way onboarded into their programs and majors in some kind of formal way, like a learning community or first-year experience course? And there, the alignment level is only 3%. And we heard people affirm this in the interviews we conducted, as well as some of the written comments, that that you don't currently have a genuine first-year experience. You have new student orientation. It's either mandatory or not mandatory. I think you've recently moved to make it mandatory, but it's clearly not very substantive. And yet it's part of your strategic plan to develop a focus in this area and to develop required orientation. Also, we asked about systematic career preparation in the first. So how do you onboard students to their academic fields and connect that to their thinking about and their understanding of the careers that these academic choices might lead them to? Again, very low alignment. Only 12% of the stakeholders thought you were aligned in kind of onboarding people, your students into their academic and career options. The college does not have a clearly delineated career services department, was one comment. Integrated career advising into a purposely planned first-year experience course is presently in the initial stages, but not yet realized. It will be something we strongly recommend you pursue. As far as academic performance and academic courses and data, there are these courses with high DFW rates. On the left there, you see some really critical courses to student progression where the DFW rates are above 25%, in some places pushing 40%. And so we asked, do you have a strategy for working with these high DFW rate courses, either to work with the faculty to redesign or to think about different pedagogical approaches or direct supports to students and so forth? 24% say that you're aligned as far as that's concerned. And one comment we heard is that these DFW rates are not regularly reviewed and they don't serve the basis of kind of an institutional level strategy. On this topic as well. So we asked about proactive academic support. Are you looking at data to try to determine which students could best benefit from academic interventions? And there, the alignment level was a little over 30%. We asked about supplemental instruction, near peer-based tutoring, which is a more economical way of scaling tutoring. And again, low alignment levels, about 18%. We have several services on campus for students, such as tutoring, but there's not currently anything in place to help with alerts or letting us identify at-risk students unless they come to us. To my knowledge, there is not a process by which we scale supplemental instruction based on DFW rates. And then on the same kind of issue of academic data, we asked about whether data is being used to schedule courses. So one major problem for student progression can be students not having the right courses available when they need them. And this leads to students either under enrolling, taking fewer credit hours, or stopping out entirely. And so we asked, are you using data in a proactive way to really identify where the needs are for students to make sure you have the capability to supply the requisite number of courses and seats? The alignment level there was only 3%. Student preference has historically not been taken into consideration when courses are scheduled. One comment we heard. So we move on to the advising issue under coordinated academic advising. We asked about proactive advising. Now, note your strategic plan does say one of your goals is to improve academic advising over the next couple of years. So we asked, are you currently using data to proactively reach out to students, to not wait for them to self-diagnose their own problems, but actually use data to say, here, you need some help. Let us help you. Alignment level was only 12%. Are you using data and advising help to help make sure students are in the right courses so that they are registered for the courses that are going to advance them? 24% alignment. Beyond the first semester, students are largely left to their own devices to figure it out, we heard. No, we have not tracked student visits, so which students are seeing advisors and when and so forth is not data you're collecting. We are working towards predictive analytics to work with at-risk students prior to classes starting. But again, this is something that has not been fully implemented. And then with advising as well, we asked about a trained advising staff. Do you have a number of trained, an adequate number of trained advisors to serve your students? Only 18% answered you were aligned as far as that's concerned. Our coordinated advising, so you've got both professional advisors, full-time advisors, a small number, I think 3, and then you've got your faculty advisors. Is there some kind of coordination between advising efforts and so forth? And the alignment level there was quite low as well, only 12%. There is an insufficient number of advisors. Also, faculty are not fully trained, nor do they have access to the tools to advise students, was one comment we heard. The current academic advising process is one of the greatest barriers to student success at our institution, was another comment we've heard. And then finally, the issue of communication. Is there a way that you can perhaps compensate for the fact that there maybe aren't enough advisors and so forth by being really on top of the communications you provide to students and the guidance you give them? The news here wasn't particularly positive either. We asked about, a call center or some kind of centralized function for proactively reaching out to students. The alignment level there was 6%. We asked about the use of texting, which has been proved by a number of national studies, some of which Georgia State has participated in, to be a really effective way of getting students to make choices that advance their progression. Only 12% alignment with regard to texting is concerned. There is not a dedicated call center, was one comment. Students feel like they receive an overwhelming number of emails, so they begin to not pay attention to the emails at all, was another comment we heard. So that's a lot of information, but as I say, it's provided not so much to inform you, because as you indicated, these are areas you already know are areas of concern, but to provide you the evidence for why these issues floated to the top for us, and the evidence you can bring back to your campus stakeholders should they ask why these are areas of concern. So before I move on to the recommendations, let me pause for a moment here and see if there are any questions or comments about this analysis of the key challenges that Monroe is.
If I may, this is Scott.
Sure.
You talked a bit about the integrated career experience and the first year experience. And one of the things we did hear from the funders was that they were not interested in that. Do you have any communication with the funders in terms of saying, hey, here's some things that we're finding that can make an impact? Because I think part of it, and we heard this from Susan, one of the funders, is the education piece that they're learning as well. And so I'm just wondering what the coordination is between what you're learning and can teach and what they're learning.
Yeah, Scott, in all frankness, we have not heard that specific issue from the funders, so we can pursue it to get some clarity on it. Just to clarify what we're saying is, there is one issue about a career services center or office, and we think there's value to that, but that's not specifically what this observation was. The observation was specifically, if you want students to efficiently progress through your academic program, you want them to find the area they're committed to studying as early as possible. And I know you are already a convert to this belief. students are still bouncing around trying to find their major or their academic field in the second or third year, their chances of graduating go down exponentially. So what you need to do is find some systematic way to onboard students, not just to picking abstract things like, oh, I want to go into sociology or I want to go into STEM fields and so forth, but to connect that choice early on to why they might want to pursue that. And that has to do with career pathways. So that's what we're observing here, is that right now there's not a coordinated way to really help students early on to kind of connect the choices they're making, which may seem very abstract, to the career options that will be in front of them in a couple of years. We will be happy to talk to the funders about the importance of that, and it's very much part of the evidence-based approaches that the NIST has.
Just a point of clarification. A couple slides back, it was noted that there's no software to identify at-risk students, and students need to come forward. I just wanted to better understand. We do have an early alert system. However, I know Scott and I talked about identifying at-risk students before they even enroll, so that there could be more of an offensive approach instead of waiting until they're failing. Is that, I just want to make sure I'm clear in understanding that point of reference.
Yeah, Grace, thank you for that. The point we're making is not predominantly one about software, and it's not one about the data available, because we think that you have very good data and you're ahead of the curve as far as the data is concerned. It's about how you operationalize the data. And this will become clearer when we get to the recommendations in a few minutes. But yes, it would be nice to begin looking at which students are at risk before they even enroll. And that would be an opportunity to maybe invite those students to a summer bridge program or some kind of substantive orientation before the start of classes. But more than that, there is not any systematic way right now, if a student is struggling in their academic field early on, for there to be an alert that goes off and for there to be confidence that that student is going to get a proactive intervention. So it's less about the software and more about how those kind of early alerts are operationalized. So ideally, if a student is a STEM major and struggling in their first math course, there's somebody who is reaching out to that student to get them the help they need, and not sitting back and waiting 2 semesters till they collect a lot of D's and F's. If a student's just completed their first math course in a STEM major and they get a D or a C minus, there's somebody who proactively reaches out at that point. Again, we'll be talking about some of these goals when we get to the recommendations in just a minute, but that's more the challenge we're seeing right now, is that there is not the systematic outreach to students based upon what may be early alert data that you already have in your control. One thing I sometimes point out is every campus, and especially Monroe, has access to one really important early alert, which is students who are dropping or withdrawing from a course in the middle of the semester. If they paid for a course and are registered for it and are withdrawing from it, that's an early alert if they're signaling that they're going to drop that course. But is there a method where Monroe takes that data point and says, okay, let's systematically over the 24 hours, first 24 hours after a student submits such a request, reach out to that student to figure out what's going on. So that's where we're talking about the kind of challenge that is being faced. Is that helpful?
It is, but I'm just thinking about, we do have an early alert system and there is follow-up by student services, but I don't want to hold up the
Okay.
presentation. I'm just trying to kind of process. Okay, thank
Okay.
you.
Yep, sure. Okay, other comments? Okay, then I'll take you to the recommendations, which was where this conversation is going anyhow. Just to point out that after we came up with an initial version of the diagnostic challenges, we met with the project leads. We also then conducted a series of interviews and got further input. That helped us shape the kind of recommendations that you're about to take a look at. These recommendations are, again, not meant to be comprehensive in the sense that they're not everything that Monroe could possibly do, but we're really trying to take the evidence in front of us and highlight changes and processes that could have the biggest impact in improving your student outcomes and reducing equity issues that you may be facing. All of these recommendations, we believe, are scalable. All of these recommendations are evidence-based, so they've been proven to be effective, and that's why they've kind of floated to the top here. So you are kind of the beneficiary of having good leadership, good staff, knowledgeable people, good data. All these things are really hard to achieve at a number of institutions, and Monroe already has those in place, so that's really positive. But to really deliver on the promises you've been making to your students, as well as the pledges you're making in your D3C3 work plan, as well as your most recent strategic plan, there are going to have to be some changes. And we're recommending the four following actions. First has to do with academic advising. To systematically deliver academic advising by standardizing systems, protocols, and training to ensure students receive consistent, proactive support across all advisors and advising units. Number two, create structured pathways, including a substantial orientation, learning communities, a first-year experience courses to guide students through their academic studies and into the first year and beyond. Third, improve outcomes in key courses with the highest non-pass rates through targeted support such as tutoring, supplemental instruction, and coordinated course redesign and scheduling efforts. And fourth, coordinate student communications to prioritize and direct information to students in a timely, proactive, and personalized manner. These recommendations are selected in part because we know they'll move the needle. They have at other like institutions. They are evidence-based, but also because they align very closely to your stated institutional goals. C3 work plan and in your strategic plan. You've already committed there to improving academic advising, to providing intrusive advising to all students, to developing pathways for all programs, to improving academic and non-academic support services, to enhancing tutoring, to using predictive analytics to identify students in need of support. So those are your public claims about what Monroe is committed to accomplishing. And we believe these four recommendations align very closely with what will be required to deliver on those promises that you've already publicly made. So as with the first set of issues we were looking at, I'm going to now move to some supporting slides to cover these issues in greater detail. But I also want to pause here and see if there are any comments or questions about this summary slide about the recommendations that the NIST is making. Okay, I'm not hearing anything. So let's go into a little more detail with the recommendations. The reality is what we will be providing you with is in many cases quite detailed implementation steps. This is for the first recommendation involving academic advising. There are a number of steps that we think can get you to the point of having that proactive data-based approach. Even embedded in this kind of detailed slide are a number of links. We've created modules that have implementation steps outlined and so forth, so you can link to greater detail. You can also link to other studies. So we participated, for instance, in a Boston Consulting Group study of multiple institutions who were implementing the more data-based proactive approach to advising. And that study will talk a little bit about the costs and benefits and so forth of such implementation. Obviously, there's not time this morning to go through all those steps. We will certainly share all of this with you after this call. But I do want to highlight for each of the recommendations a couple of the specific action items. So for advising, are we actually talking about in practice? First, standardizing academic maps and the systems used for academic advising. So as Grace is indicating, you have various tools that are already available to you, but are these tools being systematically delivered? Do students have clear maps? And when we talk about academic maps, we're not talking about a list of courses that students need to complete in order to finish their associate degree. We're talking about a true map that takes students through semester by semester. If I'm a STEM major or a business major and want to pursue a particular career, what courses should I be taking in what order? That is really critical to empowering students and your advisors. It empowers students because you do have some self-sufficient independent students who, given such maps, will follow them closely and graduate more quickly as a result and with fewer wasted credit hours. But it will also empower your advisors as you work on systematically training and delivering more consistent advising, because they can use the maps in order to help students pick courses for the semester or help get students back on path when they're off path. Second, ensure all students receive a consistent standard of care. The principle here is simple but important, which is that there are going to be variations in the advising that students receive, depending on whether they're a health professions student or a STEM student or business student and so forth. There are differences by disciplines and areas, but there are some common supports that a student should receive by the mere fact that they're enrolled at Monroe Community College, right? The fact is that every student should have the right to being tracked for the kind of early alerts that Grace was talking about a minute ago, and be confident that if an early alert is triggered, they're going to have proactive outreach in a timely fashion. Same with regard to the academic maps. The student should have some confidence that they are being tracked for their progression on these academic maps. And if they get off path, they're registered for the wrong courses, they're taking courses in the wrong sequence, somebody is noticing and reaching out to them. These are fundamental kind of supports that every student should receive. And they should receive it because there are those studies, including the Boston Consulting one that I was alluding to a moment ago, that show these kind of supports make a big difference, especially for students from low income, first generation and underserved backgrounds. And then third, developing common training for advisors. I know you right now, you've got a mixed group, a few dedicated professional advisors, as they're typically called nationally, and then lots of faculty advisors. But there really is no common commitment to what training advisors should receive for the fact that they are advising, what systems they should use. Another bit of low-hanging fruit, especially dealing with large numbers of low-income students. Low-income students are less decided about what they want to major in when they arrive at an institution. And so they'll change fields more often. Do advising notes follow the student? Is there some way that a record can be kept if a student meets with an advisor this term and then comes back to another advisor 6 months from now? Is there some continuity of the note keeping and so forth? The technologies to pull this off are easy to be had, but there needs to be training and support for staff in order to pull off that model. And, for this advising recommendation, we also go into, talking points, why these issues are so important. Evidence does show nationally that first generation low income students will move more often between majors. And so having some plan for guiding students through these decisions so that they're well made and effective is a real critical part of holding on to students and having them graduate more quickly. Another issue that is true nationally is poor advising leads to, or lack of advising leads to added time to degree. Students graduate more slowly. When you have students graduate more slowly, the students who are least likely to graduate under that scenario are going to be your low-income students, because they are going to run out of resources before they complete all their graduation requirements. So, these kind of issues also contribute in significant ways to equity gaps. There are costs involved with these kind of changes. The good news is you're part of a larger conversation where you can potentially apply for and receive some support for at least jumpstarting some of the investments that might be necessary in this area. I'll go through the other three recommendations a little bit more quickly, but the second one had to do with creating the structured pathways to guide students into their academic fields. Here, some of the action items include the talk about some kind of summer bridge program, enroll students who are most at risk of falling on Grace's point of a minute ago. The incoming data shows that they are more likely to struggle once they arrive at Monroe. Enroll them in a 4-credit summer program before the first year, build academic skills, and introduce them into their academic choices so that they're more likely to make informed choices when it comes to choosing their academic field. Develop intentional pathways to help students decide upon and, when necessary, transition between academic pathways So this often will be through a substantive first-year experience course, which might expose students to their academic field. It could also be through learning communities. We've used them very effectively in our community colleges to greatly improve graduation rates. I'll mention that Perimeter College, which we began working with in 2016, has almost quadrupled its graduation rates in about a 6-year period using some of these same strategies. So what did the learning communities look like? Instead of just the learning that a student is interested in business in their first semester, you put them in a first-year course, you put them in a learning community with other students interested in business, you expose them to some of the choices they're facing. What are the career options in business? What's the difference between being accounting and marketing and so forth? Help them make informed choices early on, bring in alumni panels, have open houses in some of the departments so that they can meet faculty and so forth. So the students in that first semester can begin to make informed choices. We've been able to reduce the number of students changing majors after the first year by about 33% through these relatively light touch and low cost sorts of programming issues. And then appoint a small group of transition advisors to help students moving between pathways and transferring to four-year institutions. These are critical points where the students are very vulnerable. You know, just to take an extreme example, if you have a current student in economics who doesn't like or isn't doing well and wants to transfer to sociology, it might only add 1 or 2 courses to their time to degree. If that same economics student says, oh, I'm going to switch from economics to nursing, it might add 2 years to the time it takes them to graduate. And it might mean that they're going to extend beyond their eligibility for their aid programs and so forth. Students don't necessarily know that, especially first generation students. So having some advisors to guide the students through those choices and the choices into four-year programs can, well pay for the price of those individuals. And again, for the talk about the structured pathways and so forth, we're giving you a number of talking points and other bits of evidence and so forth. Lack of clarity about academic field is just a critical issue, especially for the type of students you're increasingly enrolling at Monroe, and having an intentional way for students to pick fields is going to be critical. The third recommendation had to do with the outcomes with your academic courses, including courses with high non-pass rates. So here our action steps include the following: to systematically track DFW rates for all courses and proactively share these data each semester with faculty and chairs. Put that information proactively in the hands of the individuals who need to use it, which will be the department leads, the academic leads, and the faculty. Use data such as course availability data to inform course scheduling and course and program redesign efforts. So, again, if it's currently not the case that students are perhaps always finding the courses they need at the time they need them and so forth, there's a database solution to that problem, which is looking at and analyzing which courses are filling up at what point in the registration process, having some way to add the courses that the students need, and then in subsequent semesters, making the baseline more receptive to the demand that you've tracked in the previous semester. If courses have high DFW rates semester after semester, empower the faculty to look at making changes. Maybe the way courses are sequenced needs to be adjusted. Maybe the students who are taking the course need to be rethought as far as prerequisites and the pathway students are taking into the course. Maybe there are different approaches. And then we know right now you have precious few supports with regard to tutoring, supplemental instruction, and so forth. Your tutoring is largely, student driven, and oftentimes less than full-time individuals are engaged. But at the very least, as you build up those resources, use data to target the academic supports where impact. So there are courses with high enrollments, with high DFW rates. There should be some institutional correlation between where the tutoring resources go and where they're most needed based upon what's holding up students from their progression and leading them to drop out. And again, with regard to this recommendation about high non-pass rate courses and academic supports, a bunch of additional talking points and advice about that as well, in addition to the implementation steps. But it is the case that nationally, these high DFW rate courses can be a critical part of attrition after the first year. And one of the things we saw at Monroe, as you know from the slides we shared, is while your 1-year retention rate is lagging the national norm by only a couple points, your 3-year graduation rate is lagging the national norm by almost 10 points. So, one of the factors in that attrition after the first year are the DFW rates the students are beginning to accumulate in their early studies, because that leads to them falling out of compliance with what the federal government calls SAP, satisfactory academic progress. It's not in the first year that you fall out of compliance with SAP. It is in the second and third year, as you've accumulated more and more non-pass courses, your GPA goes down, your credit hour accumulation goes down. That leads to the students losing aid. And I can tell you again, the national data shows if a low-income student loses their aid, federal, state, or otherwise, their chances of graduating go down exponentially. And then fourth and finally, the fourth recommendation had to do with coordinating student communications better. Again, very detailed implementation slide we'll be providing, but some of the highlights here include, going through the process of mapping out your current communications, which we heard from at least some of your stakeholders that right now the students feel like they're bombarded with emails and that a lot of the emails are not getting any attention from the students. They're not opening them, or if they are opening them, they're not acting upon them. So do a kind of inventory of what emails are going out from which offices and make some kind of commitment to organizing that process. It can be as simple as having a student communication committee that is the pass-through for these messages going out, so that they can make sure that they're sent out in a clear fashion and in a prioritized fashion, so that the students realize what's most important to them. If on a single day, a message is going out, it's the deadline for completing the FAFSA for next semester, but it's also, a particular academic unit is having a lecture and so forth, you might want to be able to coordinate the communications so it's clear to the students which one is the one that has the highest priority and needs the most immediate action. Prioritize communications from offices key to student progression and standardize communications in critical areas related to enrollment and academic success. And then third, use data to focus communications, including text messages, on personalized proactive content. So this is another area for consideration, is scaling the use of texting to your students, especially because you have right now not a number of professional advisors, not enough tutors, not enough support staff in other areas. Texting can be an efficient way to cut through the clutter. We link to a number of recent studies that show, texting can improve FAFSA completion, or students who are removing holds from their accounts or resolving balances and so forth by 20 or 30%, and do so for a relatively low cost. And for this communication recommendation as well, you've got a number of talking points to bring back to your campus. But the reality is the starting point that we began with this morning. Navigating college is complicated, and navigating college for the students you're increasingly enrolling at Monroe, low income, first generation, part-time students, is particularly difficult. So finding ways to help students navigate, we've talked about through advising, we've talked about through their academic pathways and the choices that they're making academically. Now we're talking about communication systems. These all come to the same goal, which is helping students figure out, in effect, how to do college. And that is really half the battle. I'm going to invite some comments about all these recommendations, but I want to close on one last point before we get to that discussion. What's at stake here and why it's so important? Clearly, it's critical that you unite behind whatever you decide to do at Monroe. It's important that this cabinet, this leadership group, leave whatever decisions are made, whatever dialogue and dissent is heard and so forth at the table, and go to campus and present a united front. But I think in the interest of uniting support for these kind of changes, especially because we know you have unions on campus and buying can be complicated, it's important to message the various reasons why it's important that these changes be made, and be made in a committed and systematic fashion. First, a moral argument. and this is one I don't need to convince you about, and you probably don't need to convince many of your faculty and staff about. There is a problem morally with bringing students to our institutions and having only a minority of them graduate with the credential that they came to accomplish, and many of them leaving with debt that will hang over their head, for 15 or 20 years with no credential to help them earn more because of it. Equity gaps are also a moral issue. It's just not acceptable that we have equity gaps between students based on their race or based on their income level or other stature. And so we want to close these and address these for moral reasons. But even if you are not compelled by the moral argument, there's an institutionally driven fiscal argument that is critical to Monroe. The reality is every 100 additional students you hold on to at Monroe Community College, that's worth roughly $570,000 in additional tuition and fee revenues per year. So if you take those 100 students who are currently dropping out in their first year and bring them to successful completion of an associate's degree at the end of year 3, that would actually be about $1.5 million in additional revenues for Monroe Community College. We all know how fragile the kind of higher ed ecosystem is right now. And that's a sizable gain. And of course, what we're talking about with these changes is not an improvement in 100 more students being retained, but potentially 200, 300, 500, 1,000. Georgia State, I will say, with these same approaches over the past decade, now is graduating 3,500 more students every year than it was at the beginning of the decade. So again, these kind of changes can be profoundly important from a moral perspective, but actually life-saving, institutional saving from a fiscal perspective for individual institutions. We could be talking about tens of millions of additional dollars that Monroe can hold on to. That's particularly important at a time when the demographics in Michigan are not looking great for high school graduates. Holding on to the students you already have is holding on to the revenues they can bring Monroe. And the third argument, so there's the moral argument, there's kind of the fiscal institutional argument. There's a third argument, a kind of social political argument, that according to the Pew Research Center, individuals across the US who hold college degrees, depending upon whether it's associate or whether they go on and get their bachelor's degree, will over their careers earn between $500,000 and $900,000 more than individuals who only have a high school. You take those same 100 students who you're now taking from dropping out in the first year, bringing them to completion of an associate's degree. Some of them will then, as a result, be able to go on and get their bachelor's degree and so forth. Those 100 individuals will contribute between 50 million and 90 million more to their communities, the businesses and so forth, the tax base over the course of their working lifetimes. So, there are moral, there are fiscal, but there are also these really important political and social reasons to do the type of things that we know Monroe Community College has every ability to do, because you have the leadership in place and you've got a really knowledgeable, committed team wanting to bring about these changes. So I'm going to pause here and see what kind of questions or comments you have about the recommendations. At the same time, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So comments or thoughts about any of this?
We have a couple.
Hi, I wasn't sure if,
Yeah, Scott, you're muted. Yeah.
oh, Scott, are you talking first?
I
Sorry.
was just saying I saw you up first.
Okay,
Oh,
good. Go ahead, Carrie.
I just wanted to say thanks so much for the collaboration between our college and NIST. I've talked with Tyler quite a bit, as you can imagine. We met with him weekly, and he corresponded quite promptly and very effectively through email. And I'm just impressed with the way that you were able to work with the college to get the information needed to make such good, concise recommendations for us. I think they're well packaged. I think they're spot on. I'm very involved in all the other data collection efforts that are sort of triangulating these findings. Scott and I keep using that term. And I think now we're at a point where we have a very manageable list of recommendations that are not only aligned with the strategic plan, but more importantly, with our criteria for accreditation by the Higher Learning Commission. And we're up for a visit in 2023. So I think we're going into the preparatory year for that visit really well positioned with this collaboration with NIST. We've been talking, I think, internally about maybe working with NIST, after we hear about the decision on the planning grant to implement some of these strategies. And I'm not sure if you have a structure in place, a model where you can give us details about how we might work together on this. That's at least of great interest to me. I don't want to speak for Scott. I think he's interested in exploring that. I think it just makes sense. We really want to implement what we can, and we need to implement many of these strategies, even if we don't end up funded. And I've mentioned that to Tyler a few times. And I think you provided us with really practical strategies to do that. So I just wanted to make those comments and share my appreciation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Carrie, for that so much. And I think your comments are really important in a couple ways. One, we're thrilled to hear that you are committed to pursuing these strategies regardless of funding, because that's the kind of deep commitment we is very promising for the changes to take hold and be meaningful. Secondly, as far as your question about other opportunities, the NIST does offer intensive implementation support through the coaching process, anywhere from 12 to 24 months, where we, as you're trying to implement these various strategies, can connect you with content experts who, if it's advising, can actually show what they've done within the systems in question and so forth. And then obviously continue to have support from coaches like Tyler to kind of walk you through the steps and bring together. I know that the collaborative, the D3C3 collaborative is at least contemplating whether there'll be a kind of more systematic move to that kind of coaching. I don't know, Stephanie, if you want to say anything about that at this point, as far as what the thinking is.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on. We're hearing so much interest from all of our schools on wanting to continue with NIST and get some of that intensive coaching over the next year to implement playbook strategies. So we hear your interest and are figuring out the best way to make sure that we can get that support to all of our schools. So nothing is finalized yet, but we're in conversation and definitely hear that is a need and a desire.
Thank you. Good to hear.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. Other comments or questions?
I'd just like to make sure that we are free to utilize your presentations in our grant write-up, and that you're okay with that, because there's a lot there that, quite frankly, I just want to take word for word. You said it better than I've been writing lately, so that's very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And to Stephanie's credit, and also Sarah's on the call, the idea is that these various pieces do fit together. So we want to empower you as you're making your requests for support, and then as you're implementing and so forth, to use all of this material. The recording you can use in various sorts of ways as well. If you want to expose it to different campus stakeholders who are not on the call, you can do that. But we're going to provide a final version of the playbook in the near future. We want to give you the chance for any last kind of edits and comments and things you would like to see changed. But over the next couple of days, Tyler will be getting back to you with a final version, and you can share that as much as you would like as well.
Okay. And the other part, and actually this goes to your point about really supporting our efforts and so forth. I think it would be of value, and maybe you're already planning on this, but because you've worked with all of the schools that are applying for these grants, I think it would be very powerful and of value if you guys provided a presentation to the funders. I really heard that we're trying to edify ourselves as well as get information from you, but I think there would be a huge value in that piece, because you can really speak to, here are the needs of the colleges, here's why, and you did it so well here, and here's the benefit. And I think if they heard that, that would be influential in understanding our true needs for for funding, because I think the biggest problem that community colleges have, especially a small one like this, is getting something new off the ground. We have the ability to sustain new programming and keep it going once it's there, but the transition is economically largely unfeasible for us. And so that's what this grant to me, that to me is its greatest potential.
Yeah, good point, Scott. So yes, we're happy to do that. I will say that we're in discussions with Stephanie about doing a face-to-face meeting sometime this summer, where we'll bring together members from all the campuses that are part of the cohort to talk about common findings and next steps and so forth. We can potentially either invite funders to that meeting or schedule some a separate presentation that we could do to funders. But yeah, we've done that before. In fact, tomorrow we work with a state system in the Midwest, and we'll be presenting to that state system's Board of Regents, not about all the individual data for each campus, but about what were the collective observations about what's working across that particular state. And so we could do something similar for this cohort.
Yeah, and I'm going to really stress, if at all possible, for such a presentation to occur prior to their judgment of our proposal, so they really understand where they're coming from, would really be a value. That's just my personal thought.
That's a good point. So I see Stephanie shaking her head. So yeah, we're happy to pull something like that together, and would be happy to meet. And if it would be, they could speak more frankly, and we could speak more frankly, just with NISS and the funders in the room, we can do it that way as well.
Tim, I had a question about the recommendations. What I like about the presentation is, while they're really each one of the 4 recommendations, there's a lot to them. It's targeted. I'm in our foundation office, and this is admittedly a pet project of mine, but one of the areas that we're really focused on is ensuring basic needs security for our students, which, our internal polling of our students shows that there's a pretty high degree of students that are affected by that and impacting their ability to graduate and succeed. Is there, outside of the 4 recommendations that you made, are there other recommendations that just didn't make the cut? Is this something that you didn't see in the data that we provided? Can you talk a little bit about what isn't in these recommendations that we might want to pull into this grant proposal?
Yeah, that's a really good point, especially as we're beginning to close the session, because I don't want to give the impression that these are the only issues that could possibly benefit your students. That the point was to find things that we think will have the biggest impact on moving the needle with regard to graduation rates and reducing equity gaps when they exist. So that was the goal. I will say this, that a number of these strategies are intended to help with some of the issues you're talking about: food insecurities, housing insecurities, life issues, and so forth, in a impactful way that may be underappreciated. And I'll say this, that one of the things we've done at Georgia State through these approaches, all the ones we've talked about this morning, is greatly reduce time to degree. So the average student who's completing a degree at Georgia State is now doing so in a semester less time. That saves the students over $20 million a year in tuition and fees. When you aggregate, all those thousands of students graduating in a semester less time, and is part of the reason why we've been able to eliminate equity gaps. Our Pell and non-Pell students are now graduating exactly the same rate, as are Black and white students and so forth. Because one way we can be the most impactful in helping students who are fragile financially is by doing our job really well and helping them pick their courses efficiently and get through their programs efficiently and so forth. And I do say to my own faculty, while we have food agreements where we have on everyone, we have 6 campuses at Georgia State, everyone has a facility that allows students to pick up food for free. We also have agreements with a number of Atlanta area homeless organizations where we provide short-term care for these students. So we have some dorms where students can stay short-term, but ultimately we don't commit to providing long-term solutions for students who are homeless, but we collaborate with these other institutions in the Atlanta area and so forth. All of these things exist, and we're happy to share best practices and what we're doing with you. But when it comes to what is going to most move your graduation rate, the frank answer I would have is you would be better putting your resources into doing what your mission is really well than to trying to do what is the mission of other organizations in the Detroit area. And I know there are a lot of organizations that are committed to helping individuals with homelessness and food insecurities and so forth. So definitely, I'm not saying ignore those issues, absolutely not. But focusing your attention on, you have a mission by your very founding to educate students and to do so and deliver the credentials they need to have successful careers and lives and so forth. That's where we think, you should put your top priorities, but not to the exclusion of students who are home or hungry and so.
Well, I just want to say thank you very much, Tim. This, I think a lot of this as Kiri said, is spot on. A lot of these challenges we're very much aware of, even as we negotiate with our union to change the way we do advice. Lots of challenges, but thank you very much for.
My pleasure. Thank you, President Clarke, for your time today, and for the whole team again. You've been fantastic. We really appreciate it. It's not the last time you'll see us or we'll see you, but we very much have benefited from your collaboration and all your great insights. It's been a pleasure working with you.
Thank you.
Have a great day, all. Thank you.
Okay, you too.
Kojo, could cabinet meet? Could
Thanks,
cabinet meet for a few minutes and just debrief?
Yes, we
Is
need
that
to.
okay? Can we schedule another meeting? Sorry for the interruption. Thank you. Do you want to
Thank you,
schedule
Kat.
another meet?
This is our,
Re-enter?
so cabinet,
Wait a
please.